Zealand has a multi-billion-dollar dairy industry that really depends on healthy freshwater systems. Yet often the public just hears about the fights and tensions between the farmers and the clean green lobby. On this week's show, we look at a partnership scheme that has the potential to create real change, as well as increasing the sustainability of the dairy industry.
So Living Water is a partnership, a conservation partnership between Fonterra and the Department of Conservation. It spans 5 catchments from near the top of the country right down to the very bottom, and it's a project that's running out over 10 years, and we're just approaching the end of the second year of Living Water. Very much it's about working with communities and iwi and a whole range of people on these catchments that have quite high intensity dairying, but also really important values from a nature perspective.
That vision came about through a lot of dialogue between Fonterra and the Department of Conservation about what we were jointly seeking to achieve in catchments across the country. So it's really meaningful to both Fonterra and the Department of Conservation. It reflects that a sustainable dairy industry is really a really important part of our communities, but that depends on healthy, resilient ecosystems, which are also hugely important to our communities. Fonterra is investing $20 million over 10 years. That's not necessarily meaning that it's going to be $2 million a year over that period. It's tailored to the projects that are required in different catchments. So in the planning phase, obviously the spend hasn't been huge, but as we move into ramping up the projects across the country, we're aiming to spend up to $20 million over that period of time.
The Living Water scheme operates in 5 catchments.
The 5 catchments are all significant for the amount of dairying that is associated with those areas. They all have high natural values associated with them as well, and they span the country from the top to the bottom. And bearing in mind, one of the outcomes that we're seeking is to model best practice, to test, refine the old, but also try the new, and then allow those learnings to be spread into the farming community much more broadly. So having 5 catchments that are across the country makes sense, if only from that perspective. But certainly, all of them are significant nationally. 2 of them are particularly significant internationally, and the first of those is Waituna, down in the very deep south, which was recognised by the Wetlands Convention in Ramsar in 1971. 168 countries signed up to it. Miranda Pukorokoro is another one that has been recognised internationally via the RAMS Convention. So I suppose what I'm really saying there is that with a catchment that's recognised in that way, it's not only a national responsibility we have, but also an international one to ensure that we restore it and in fact nurture it back to full health again. The Waituna Lagoon down in the very, very south, quite close to Invercargill, has been in decline from a biodiversity perspective for some time. There is a whole range of initiatives now from iwi, community, DOC, NIWA, Dairy NZ, all working to restore that catchment. It's been described as an international airport for migratory birds. It's a very significant wetland, and we're working really on one part of it, around 3,500 hectares of something that's much, much larger than that. But we're just aligning and supporting a lot of the work that's there. If we move up to Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere, just out of Christchurch, that flows out into the Pacific Ocean. There's around 160 birds of different species that have been seen in that area. Again, it's unfortunately one that has been a victim of intensification of farming over time. So part of our work is to re-establish the sustainable model of farming and restore that lake back to its former strong values for nature. Moving further north from there up to the peat lakes where we're standing at the moment, there's 31 peat lakes in the Waikato area, and internationally that's really significant. They're all quite significant in their own way because of the low nutrient aspect that makes the flora and fauna that exists there quite special. So we've got black mudfish, we've got giant cockapoo in these peat lakes, which don't exist anywhere else, certainly in the world, and they thrive here. We've also got grey duck and Australasian bitterns, things that like a peat lake environment. So we're trying to restore those and ensure also that the water from the peat lakes that goes down into the Waikato River is of high quality. Moving across to Miranda Pukorokoro, So that's, again, recognised internationally, as I said, by the Wetland Convention. It's got approximately 40 different types of seasonal birds that are seen there, including the bar-tailed godwit, which every summer spends its time in Miranda and then sets off on a 12,000 k journey to Alaska every winter, non-stop. So again, that just, I think, helps to tell the story about our international obligations. We're just one part of this bird's home and life cycle, and so doing the right thing is very important. It also has a very unique shell bank structure which draws these birds in. So working in that area is important. And lastly, if we look up in the Hikurangi area, which the Hikurangi catchment flows down into the Kaipara harbour, and high values around tuna and cockapoo and all sorts of quite specific species that live in that Northland catchment. It's a floodplain, huge challenges that we are dealing with there in terms of how do we get great biodiversity outcomes from farming that's actually occurring in that floodplain. That's the challenge, and that's what we're working on together.
The whole operation relies on partnerships and networks.
Farmers are really engaged in the program. We've got, in all of those catchments, there are farmers that are hugely passionate about their environment, and that what we're often finding is that they have been working, by themselves or in groups for many, many, many years, for generations, to look after those catchments. And so, it's great for Fonterra to be able to come and bring some support to those great efforts that have been going on already.
Well, in one way, it's very different to be working with a large cooperative and a Department of Conservation coming together. That's probably fairly unique internationally. But in another way, it's very the same as a range of our partnerships, where increasingly we're working with large corporates, but also smaller businesses in small communities. And I think there's just a general groundswell of businesses wanting to be involved in conservation. This is one type of that, but there's also a range of other large and small businesses that are really getting involved, and it's a very exciting time for conservation and business.
There's a lot of work going on behind the farm gate right now. There's a huge amount of kind of investment by farmers in effluent systems and nutrient management and planting of waterways and fencing of waterways. This initiative is about taking that to the next level and reaching out into communities and looking at where are the intersections between agriculture, the dairy industry and the sort of the wider ecosystem that it operates in, and understanding what it will take for that to be healthy, resilient and able to support the dairy industry going forward.
Well, the opportunity we have is to explore new ways of doing things. One of the key outcomes we're seeking is to challenge some of the ways we've been approaching sustainability on farm and off farm. So in other words, challenge and potentially refine things that we've already been doing, but we're also pretty excited about what's possible. We need to be on the leading edge, I think, internationally, of techniques that will take us to a better place in terms of sustainable farming and great outcomes for the environment. This project gives us that opportunity, and the sort of people that are involved have the skills and the experience to do it, so that's a really exciting part.
Fonterra funds the scheme, but living water is dependent on all stakeholders working together with a common goal. Coming up after the break, we see how it's working in the Waikato Peat Lakes.